All right. It says I'm live, so let's go ahead and get this started. If you can hear me and you can see me, please let me know in the chat. It is good to see everybody, as always, here on a Marauder Monday. Now, we're going to talk about some things about related to the idea that this whole thing is going to last quite a while, or at least we should prepare as if it will, no matter how we really feel about it. The longer this thing goes on for, the worse it is for everybody. And we all know that the longer you drag these things out for, there's a better chance of terrible things happening due to mistakes or miscalculations or whatever it might be. So I see everybody in the chat saying 5x5. Looks like we've got Durgan in the house, Harbor Prepper, DSD Swaff. I'm going to go ahead and say it that way because it sounds more interesting to me. Grisio Nemo, Country Humans, Grease Fan. Good to see everybody. And I'm glad you're all here. Thank you so much for being here. Now, and Durgan, thank you for the hair compliment. Before anyone else asks, no, I do not dye my hair. It literally grows this way. So let's get started on why we're talking about what we're talking about tonight. What is causing a lot of the problems in the world right now? Well, we know it's a lot to do with the conflict happening overseas. And we're going to kind of start this conversation by touching base on some of the newer issues that have come out of that area. And then we're going to move to a different part of the world where other things are starting to spring up. And then we're going to come back home to the United States to talk about what's going on here and why there's a lot of different areas we have to prepare for regarding our safety. I mean, there's a lot of different attacks occurring on people like us, and we're just regular people. But I don't know about you, it feels like the inflation and the economy and everything happening right now is almost a personal attack on me, not just as Americans or as people of the world. I mean, literally, I'm getting tired of going grocery shopping. I'm getting tired of spending money on things that I know should cost much less, but they don't. And then there's more and more evidence every single day as to why they're costing more and why this isn't going to just fix itself overnight. I don't believe inflation is transitory any longer, and I don't think anyone else should either. And I'm sure many of you didn't believe that in the first place, which I did not either. Now, let's go ahead. Manaman69 is here as well. Carrot Top, good to see you. Oida Tudiant, hello. And let's start doing what we usually do, which is we share information via some of the news that's coming out around the world. And that way we can all be on the same page every week to kind of discuss some of the things that are happening. Now, we know this is big news right now. So let's just talk about it really quickly and get some ideas together as to why this is an issue we have to keep an eye on. And the thing I like to remind everybody, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe if you want to come see these live streams every week. And I do have a private members and Patreon members only live stream coming up this Wednesday. Okay, I'm going to put it at 8 o'clock Central Standard Time. I did have a request to have it a little bit earlier, so 8 o'clock is about as good as I can do versus 8:30. But that gives me, a half hour earlier, and I do look forward to seeing you all there if you're a member or on Patreon. I'm doing that as just a thank you for supporting the channel. So make sure you're there, and if you don't remember for some reason, just check my community post as well as on Patreon, because I'll be doing a reminder tomorrow about it. Now, what happened here is there was an attack, right? Now, Alexander Dugin is basically being called, Putin's right-hand man or his religious, mentor or whatever else you want to call it. But at the end of the day, this is inner circle territory, and this inner circle is now being attacked. Now, this article is interesting, and we all know the Sun has their own ideology. Everybody does, right? There's all kinds of political bias in every news article you ever read anymore. But it is interesting to see the way that they're kind of crafting this story around the fact that it's clearly Russia who is actually behind the attack on their own people, which is interesting to consider. But I also think that it's very naive to brush anything that Russia says aside as being obviously false no matter what because of who it's coming from. That makes it very easy to dismiss any other information that comes out of that country from now on. And I think that's dangerous because at some point in time, they may be telling us exactly what's happening, and then we're going to assume they're lying just because we've been told that's all they do, and then we're going to be misinformed about the situation. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at it, but at the end of the day, I like to take everything with a grain of salt and then do my own research and come up with my own opinions based on some of the different reports I've been able to read. So let's go through this to kind of give you some idea of how they are presenting the information in a certain way, probably to set up some kind of future concept here. That's just my opinion, okay? So Vladimir Putin's so-called spiritual mastermind has suffered a suspected heart attack after surviving an attempt on his life, which claimed the life of his daughter, actually, which is Daria Dugina, okay? I'm not exactly sure if I'm saying that correctly, but I'm going to do my best here, all right? Now, This was a car bombing that occurred, okay? And basically, Daria Dugina was a journalist who had been in Ukraine quite a bit and had been in places like the like Azov steel mill and in that entire area, okay? So basically what they're saying is that there is a counterintelligence account that reported the news of this heart attack as being possibly even like a nervous breakdown or something like that due to the loss of a daughter. Everything else, all that really matters is that this is some inner circle stuff that's going on. But now people are coming out and saying, even though Russia is accusing Ukrainian intelligence as being part of the or behind the attack, basically this article is trying to say that this is more likely coming directly from Vladimir Putin, because this is how they do things there. They stage these attacks and they create chaos so that they can act on it and then react to it. Now, we'll get to why that's important here very soon, but just keep in mind that this is how this whole thing is being presented. And I don't like having to continually repeat that, but it's just true. They're trying to talk about it as if it's either some kind of a false scenario that is going to be used later as either misinformation or as some justification for action, or it really did happen the way that Russia's saying it happened, and then we're going to see an escalation of the conflict going on due to the fact that things are happening there on their soil and everything else related to that. Now, here's the things I want everybody to keep in mind. They're trying to, in this article, claim that no matter what is coming out of Russia, it's false. And that's something that I want to remind everybody could be dangerous in the future based on the fact that we don't know who's telling us what at this point in time, especially from this far away. So we have to take any reporting we can get and do our best with it. We can't just write something off purely because of the source when the source that we're getting the other side of the information from could be just as compromised. Let's be honest. Now, Russian state media has bizarrely claimed, see, it's bizarrely, they're not just claiming it, they're bizarrely claiming it. See, this is kind of like reading or watching CNN throughout the Trump era, where everything was so bizarre or insane or unhinged, right? It was always some kind of presentation of why this couldn't make any sense no matter what anyone says, right? So they're bizarrely claiming the assassination was carried out by a female Ukrainian assassin who traveled to Russia last month with her 12-year-old daughter. All this stuff, right? And like I said, we can't verify this information, but just keep in mind that the way this is being put out there really sets the stage for a possible escalation, and that things like this in the past had led us to global conflict, right? We all know that assassinations have started many wars throughout our time, and this is one that could definitely do more to damage the situation than to help it. So these are all things we got to keep an eye out for. And just in case anybody in the chat is wondering, no, I'm not, some plant. I'm not here trying to spew some side of the argument or anything like that. Okay. What I'm trying to do is just analyze what's happening and then relate it to our preparedness and understand that this means we should be keeping an eye on the situation to the point of it possibly causing additional escalation, regardless of who was actually at fault for the attack. Escalation is likely due to the situation, especially because of the amount of media attention that it's receiving. Now, let's get back in the chat here for 1 second. Let's see. Joey Coffins is here. Good to see you. The Bitter Critter as well. And the Bitter Critter says escalation is inevitable. And I believe that's true as well. And there is just a slowness to it that nobody was necessarily prepared for in the beginning. During February, when all this started, a lot of us felt like things could happen very fast. And we were getting very concerned about, okay, if any kind of nuclear event happens, we need to make sure we have gas masks. We need to make sure we have potassium iodine, all this stuff. And of course, all of that was important to have and important to get. And of course, the supply ran out very quickly. Now, we haven't had to use any of that, thank God. And nobody should ever want to have to use any of those supplies. But the thing that kind of caught everyone off guard was just how long this whole thing could drag on for without hitting that inflection point. But when you look back through history and you look at other major conflicts throughout, the 20th century, you'll be able to see that yes, these things actually do take a very long time to reach a full climax, and we haven't seen anywhere near that yet. So always keep that in mind when you're preparing. We're going to have to spend more time preparing because it's going to take a long time for this thing to end. And in the meantime, all we can do is get more and more ready for how long it might last. Dave Sickles, good to see you as well. Okay. Minuteman 69 doesn't own anything now at all. Everything's just on loan. So, hey, you know what? However you do your thing, that's how you do your thing. I'm not a big fan of that strategy, but I'm not going to get mad at you for it either. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next part of the conversation. Now, we know what happened last week, and that's what we do here. We review things from the previous week so we can kind of just be on the same page. But just keep in mind, if we're talking about false accusations or false events that could lead to higher escalation, this was another one that was being put out there quite a bit, okay? So their whole idea here was that basically Russia said, don't come to work on Friday if you work at this nuclear plant, because we have reports, or whatever you want to call it, intelligence, whatever, that something might happen and it might not be something we can prevent. And that is definitely an interesting situation now, isn't it? So when you have these telegraph scenarios where people say, hey, something could happen today, so don't come to work. Now, if something happens, it was already expected, and now the narrative is already being set. So you have this stage that's been set, but how is the play going to unfold? And obviously, this happened last week, and nothing happened on Friday that would cause for alarm. But all this should tell you is that every single week and every single day, the opportunity for something major to occur exists. And in fact, in many ways, it's already set up for somebody to capitalize on. However, all it takes is one opportunist or one opportunity taken by any form of power. And when I say that, I mean foreign or domestic, regardless of where these threats come from. Anyone could have acted on this intelligence and created a situation that would have required escalation by one side of the equation. And that is something that should concern you, because not only are these threats possible in the sense of being real, but it's also allowing someone else to say, okay, Friday it is. And then that moves things into a whole different territory, because now you've just painted the picture for everybody so easily without having to actually do any of the legwork. So keep all of that in mind. And the whole deal here was that Russia told workers at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant not to show up to work Friday because basically they're saying there was speculation and allegations from both Russia and Ukraine that an accident or an incident is being planned Friday at the plant. Interesting, right? And that Thursday, Russia threatened to shut down the plant, warning that there was a risk of a human-made disaster due to alleged continued shelling by Ukraine. And then, of course, Ukraine says that the shelling was actually done by Russia, or being allowed to happen by Russia, or whatever you want to call it. Either way, there was a lot of problematic occurrences going on at this nuclear plant. And the thing to keep in mind is that if something catastrophic happens there, it doesn't really matter who was at fault. It can affect everyone. It can affect the entire world. And don't forget that there was radiation detected in the air and I believe in the rain during the Chernobyl incident, all the way as far as the west coast of the United States. So, and don't forget Fukushima, that's got plenty of issues still going because of it. And we're just not going to talk about that anymore because it's boring now, right? So just keep in mind, little things like this can move into larger things very easily. And then big things don't go away very fast. And that's why we're talking about how this is going to keep going on and on and on. Okay. Now, real quick, back in the chat for a minute. Brian Keith Prepper, good to see you. Farmer's Son Preppin, good to see you as well. Michigan Girl says, then they will say, see, we knew about it. And that's what I was trying to allude to. Yes, they have the opening, and it's very easy to seize upon the opportunity. And it doesn't matter if they do it or if someone else does it or whatever happens, as long as the confirmation bias exists because of the predetermined story, then we already know what the reaction is going to be afterward. And you won't have to convince anybody else of anything, regardless of the fact, because they already said that's what happened, right? Let's drink some coffee. Everybody needs a little bit, even though it's nighttime now. Excellent. Okay, so Tom Doolittle, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let's see. Sacco Mag, what bands do you listen to? Man, I listen to everything. That's a really difficult thing for me to answer because my playlist is horrible, and some of it's amazing and some of it's terrible, and I still enjoy it. Guilty pleasures is a large part of my music taste. I don't know why, it just is what it is. But generally, I like rock. So, and I don't know why, but I've got a weird thing for hair metal, even though I was never really big into it. I just get more and more into it the older I get. So I don't know why, but oh well. If you ever see me with super long hair and like a bunch of glam rock stuff on, I apologize. Now, why does this matter? Well, it could move us into nuclear war territory, right? That's something we all consider. That's something we're all worried about. Well, just recently, as in 3 hours ago, the Kremlin official reveals what it would take for Russia to use nuclear weapons, all right? And this whole article's in basic, their entire point of the article is to say it was only going to be used in self-defense. Okay, nuclear weapons can only be used in self-defense. We're never going to use them unless it's to defend ourselves. Now, with the first two things we just discussed, where they're talking about an attack occurring and taking out some inner circle important people, and then we're talking about a possible attack occurring on this nuclear power plant and being told that it could happen more and more, and being told that these things could occur, and if they do occur, we already know who will be at fault, and everything else related to this. At what point do you consider something to be in the best interest of self-defense? Okay, if you're under attack, then your reaction to that attack is defensive. Regardless of how you want to look at it, that's how easily it can be put out there. And then what justification do you need any longer to use nuclear weapons? So quickly, we'll go ahead and discuss a little bit of what this article is trying to say. Moscow is well aware that resorting to nuclear weapons would touch off a lose-lose situation that could lead to cascading destruction around the globe. Earlier this month, Russian President Vladimir Putin suggested that nuclear war should be a last resort, if that. There can be no winners in nuclear war. It should never be unleashed, and we stand for equal and indivisible security for all members of the world community, Putin wrote in a letter to the participants of a conference on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Okay, Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, also suggested last week that using nuclear weapons in Ukraine should not be on the table. But we all know they have the capability, and they're more than able to use them if they decide to. So keep this in mind, okay? At any point in time, they can be used. Someone can use them even if someone else says they shouldn't. And don't forget that in many times throughout history, there have been rogue military units within militaries all around the world that have done things that they were not allowed to do or were not ordered to do. There are rogue entities within major superpowers, I guarantee you that. And you have to wonder what they might do in regards to their personal ideology, okay? Always keep that in mind. These things can happen based on the fact that somebody who has too much power might disagree with what's being done right now with the people who hold the keys. All right, now, self-defense. That's a big part of that conversation. We're only going to use nuclear weapons in a defensive way, okay? Well, what is the rest of the world doing regarding this conflict that could push somebody to feel like they're being attacked by other members of the world community, right? Well, I will tell you. First off, funding matters, okay? Now, here's what's interesting. The European Union's military assistance to Ukraine is losing steam as no new help was announced in July, okay? Interesting. Now, here's a few reasons that I have to speculate here. There's a lot of stuff here in the article, okay? Despite the war entering a critical phase, new aid initiatives have dried up. Ukrainian military officials and politicians have reiterated that major European nations are not actively engaged in helping the military forces or supporting the aid coming from the U.S., okay? So a lot of countries are taking a step back and saying, we can't really actually give you any more aid. We can't actually provide you with additional aid. And part of me wonders, is this because they're broke? Because I think they are in many ways. Every country is getting more and more broke every single day. Is this because they need to keep their resources for themselves because they're concerned about what might happen here in the near future and they need to be able to defend themselves from any escalatory situation that occurs because of this conflict? Or do they not want to be targeted by a country like Russia who has more nuclear weapons than anybody else on the planet? And by continually giving aid to Ukraine, are they possibly making themselves a target because at some point in time, Russia could decide that they have to defend themselves from these countries that are basically accomplices, right, in what they could be considered to be a crime in many ways, right? So anytime somebody gives someone a weapon to use in a crime, knowing that they're using it in a crime, that person's now an accomplice. And that person can be charged with a crime and actually taken to prison for aiding the person who is committing the crime. So at what point in time are we going to look at what's happening around the world and say, well, Russia's not going to ever do that because they can't blame these countries for supporting Ukraine. They aren't actually pulling the triggers. So why could they actually do anything against them? But here they are standing down and discontinuing certain portions of their aid. Okay, but what about the United States? Because I mean, that's where I live. So I'm concerned about what any retaliation might look like, especially coming our way. Well, we're sending more weapons to Ukraine, and this time it's to aid a counterattack. So not only are we actually sending weapons and sending aid continually, and we have been since the beginning of this whole thing, but now we're actually sending weapons and aid with the mindset of it being used in a counterattack. What do you do when you're under attack, even if it's because it's a counterattack? Well, I would say in general, you defend yourself. no matter why you're being attacked or no matter why the existence of a counterattack exists in the first place, you're still going to defend yourself from said counterattack, no matter who you are. When we invaded Iraq, there was counterattacks to our invasion. I'm sure we defended ourselves during those attacks, regardless of the fact of whether or not they were a counterattack. So at what point in time does the activity that's occurring here result in a defensive reaction? And that's why everyone should still be concerned about the possible use of nuclear weapons here. This isn't necessarily, oh, well, until someone from a major superpower hits us with a missile, we're not going to use nuclear weapons. No, they said it straightforward as much as they had to. Our nuclear arsenal is only for nuclear or for self-defense. It's only to defend ourselves with. Are they under attack? Well, I don't know. You tell me. But according to this article, it sure sounds like they are. Not saying they don't deserve it. Don't get me wrong. That's not my point here. What I'm trying to say is that the dangerous scenario that's evolving here is getting more and more out of hand and fitting more into the narrative as to why these larger, terrible weapons could eventually be used. Okay. A newly announced U.S. shipment of weaponry includes armored vehicles that can clear minefields ahead of a major ground movement. Russia said it foiled Ukraine's attempts this week to strike Crimea. The Pentagon's latest package includes up to $775 million of weapons and supplies from its stockpile. And let's see, there's one more here that I wanted to touch base on. Okay. Okay. The Defense Department will also continue to send a steady stream of rockets for the HIMARS launchers that have been credited with destroying Russian command posts and ammunition depots and other artillery designed to disrupt supply lines. Taken together, the new shipment of up to $775 million of weapons and supplies from the Pentagon stockpiles illustrates an emerging dual strategy, fueling Ukraine's immediate artillery fight while also helping to build up an arsenal to support a counterattack near Kherson, the country's south, that has yet to fully materialize. Okay. The latest shipment includes 40 armored vehicles equipped with giant rollers to clear minefields ahead of any Ukraine ground operation, as well as 50 armored troop-carrying Humvees and 1,500 tow-guided missiles and 1,000 Javelin anti-tank missiles. Okay, we're sending all of that over there to be used against Russia. The HIMARS systems have been doing things to Russian installations, to Russian troops, to Russian vehicles, to Russian supplies and equipment. At what point are they under attack? All I'm trying to say is that as many times as people try to write off the threat of possibly seeing some kind of a nuclear event, every single week I feel like we're reminded as to why it could definitely happen and why it might likely happen if things keep continually going on the way they are. And one of the reasons why I said in this live stream's title is to prepare for this SHTF to take a while is because it's going to take a long time. It's going to keep grinding on slowly. And unfortunately, and I say that in the strangest of manners, because I don't think it's unfortunate to not be in the middle of full-on SHTF. Don't get me wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. But the problem with a very slow grind SHTF that may eventually bring us to full-blown SHTF is the fact that during that slow grinding process, you are being slowly grinded away. And then when you are at rock bottom, when it comes to resources, supplies, food, whatever it is that we can no longer afford or no longer have access to, that's when full-blown SHTF actually hits. So you've been stripped down to the bare minimum, and that's when you're supposed to survive the worst of it, right? So that concerns me because that's what I feel like we're heading towards at this point. I feel like I'm being slowly grounded down into a bunch of ground beef or whatever you want to call it. And then at some point, I'm actually going to be thrown on the griddle to be turned into a well-done hamburger. And that's not how I like to eat my burgers. So this is an issue. And my metaphors make it sound like I'm hungry. So I just want everyone to be aware of the fact that the longer this goes on for, the harder it is for us to deal with the aftermath of the scenario that could unfold during this time. And the more desperate people get around the world, the more desperate other countries get, the more likely these global conflict scenarios are going to grow and escalate and become something worse. So it's going to take a while. We have to really be in this for the long haul. Now, regarding the fact that we're sending all that aid, $775 million worth of aid, and a lot of very high-tech equipment that's specifically designed for a counterattack. Well, let's talk about why we can't really afford it. Okay. America's industrial base isn't ready for war with China. Interesting. Yet we're sending all these supplies and all this money overseas, but we're not ready to actually fight one of the worst adversaries we could possibly get into a conflict with, which is China. Okay. Now, the war in Ukraine should galvanize Washington policymakers. It has demonstrated that America's defense industrial base isn't up to the job of supplying the U.S. military with weapons for a prolonged conventional conflict with a major power such as China. Production lines for Stinger and Javelin missiles destined for Ukraine are stretched to capacity, with critical components no longer produced in sufficient quantity to meet demand. The industrial competencies required for sustained conventional warfare have atrophied. In 2018, the Trump administration identified nearly 300 significant gaps across 10 risk archetypes in the defense industry, such as reliance on a foreign supplier that could directly undermine the U.S. military's ability to fight a major war. The causes of these gaps vary and are subject to debate. They range from the general decline of domestic manufacturing to Congress's failure to ensure a predictable defense funding cycle, and from the predatory industrial policies of other nations to an assumption that America's future wars would be quick and decisive. Whatever the cause is, the status quo is profoundly dangerous. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I understand what it is they're trying to get across in this article, and I mostly agree with it. I don't think we have the manufacturing capacity to actually go toe-to-toe with China right now based on what we're seeing going on overseas in Europe. Look, China makes all the microchips that go into our military equipment. China makes half of the stuff that goes into our military's equipment. When it comes to anything electrical that requires circuit boards, that requires any kind of component related to advanced technology, China has their finger in it somehow, some way. And even companies like Surefire and Trigicon and everybody, they have to use certain things from China no matter how badly they want to actually make their products in the USA. So even though things will say assembled in the USA, especially if they're made in states like Oregon, who have a lot stricter rules when it comes to what you're allowed to say in regards to where your products are manufactured, at the end of the day, they have to say assembled because everybody gets their LED emitters and everybody gets their circuitry and everything else related to that stuff from China, not only because it's more cost effective, but in some ways it's because it's the only place to get it from. So not only are we struggling just to keep up with the demand of the supplies needed overseas right now, but we also would be cut off from the things that actually make those supplies possible if we were to go into a conflict with the country who produces most of the resources required for creating those types of products. So why should we be concerned about this SHTF thing lasting a long time? I mean, you tell me. It seems like everything keeps adding up to us having a lot of issues in the United States. Now, it might not happen to us directly, but it's going to happen to us somehow, some way. When I say that, I mean, even if it's just financially, that's still terrible for both of us, okay? And when I say both of us, I mean you on the other side of the keyboard and me, okay? Or you on the other side of the phone and me, whoever or whatever you're doing. Because honestly, this is what it looks like. It looks like we're kind of stretched thin already. Now, Europe, they're either afraid of Russia, so they're stepping back and saying, no more aid, please don't nuke us, or they're already broke and they can't actually send any more aid. And that should tell you something too, because what happens next, okay? This is why things are so difficult. Alberta Prepper, good to see you. Glad you're here. Mark Olson, hello. You got a 410? I like 410. That's a good little cartridge, okay? And in case you don't know, 410 is like the smallest bore shotgun, basically. And nothing wrong with it at all, in all honesty, okay? Let's see. Hunt Outdoors is asking about my job. So honestly, I don't have a normal job at this point in time. I do YouTube and I work another gig on the side with my own company. It involves my wife, and it's something that we do working from home. And honestly, it's been a very good transition for me, thanks to being able to spend more time with my family. I have young kids, and being able to spend time with them is very important. But before that, which I'm talking about a year ago, I actually had a job running a restaurant group. So I was in hospitality management. So I've done that for many, many years, and I've been in hospitality for most of my career, pretty much all of it. So yeah, I've done the 9 to 5. I've done more like the 9 to 10, 9 to 11. But at the same time, I have fully transitioned to doing things for myself, which was part of what happened during 2020, because that crisis hit the hospitality industry so hard that it kind of gave me a wake-up call that I needed a way to figure out how to earn a living without having the government being able to walk in the door one day and just say, yeah, you're shut down now, goodbye. And that was very hard to deal with. I'm not going to argue with that. And I feel for all of my friends and family that are still in the hospitality industry, because it's still a very difficult thing to come back from. And the fact that the government could just walk in and tell those businesses they couldn't be open anymore was appalling. So kind of a weird wake-up call for me, and it kind of forced my hand into figuring out something else. And honestly, being my own boss has been pretty rewarding, so I appreciate it. But figured I'd share that with y'all, because who cares? You guys can know a little bit about me. That's why you're here. Now, Realistic Prepping wants to know what's the one thing I would miss the most during SHTF, and that's a difficult one. But I would say that, I mean, convenient food is really hard to say no to, right? And I think that we all take that almost more for granted than just about anything else. Eating 3 meals a day is a big deal. And being able to do it at 3 different places if you want to, at a moment's notice, and being able to get 3 different styles of food from wherever you want. You can get, Chinese food, Mexican food, and sushi all on the same trip. That's pretty intense. And not being able to do that again would be kind of sad. So I might throw that one out there. Anyway, Mark Olson, I did see that, and that is an interesting development, but I didn't have enough time to research it, so I'm not going to discuss it tonight, because I don't like to throw things out there that I haven't had a chance to at least look over before, bringing it up to the good people here. Now, let's move on to the next part of that equation, okay? So basically they're saying that we couldn't actually survive a war with China. Anything prolonged would hurt us too hard in our industrial base, and we wouldn't be able to keep up. So that being said, what about the fact that China has also been continually developing their military to specifically take us out? Here's a consideration you have to make, okay? We have basically tried our best to stay ahead of the curve. We've been trying to push ourselves to always be the greatest and the best military power in the world. So we're always at the forefront, trying to have the best technology, the best war fighters, the best everything, because we need to stay number one. So being number one can be difficult sometimes because, hey, what's up, Prepper? Now, good to see you. Being number one can be hard because you don't really have anything to target in the sense of like what you need to be able to deal with. Yes, we know what our adversaries have, but being number one is always you just trying to be the best at everything, better than everyone else. Now, the strategic value that has for other countries is that countries like China can look at the US and say, okay, here's what they have, here's what they're capable of. We need to create specific equipment and specific strategies to literally do whatever we have to do to defeat them. So they can then plan around what we have versus us having a plan to just have the best no matter what. And so that can be difficult at times because, I mean, I don't know if anyone here has ever ran like a sports team or something like that, but if you're number one, all everyone else is trying to do is figure out how to beat you. And then all you're trying to do is stay unbeaten. And that can be a lot harder than just beating one team. If all you have to do is beat one team, you can study and analyze every single aspect of what they do and then pick it apart until you can find the best playbook to defeat that team with. Whereas if you are number one, every team's coming for you. You don't exactly know what their strategy is because there's so many of them. So you just have to do what you can to be the most well-rounded and best team and hope that nobody can knock you off of your first place pedestal, right? So the PLA has tailored its capabilities to defeat any U.S. intervention in Taiwan. The DF-26B, a carrier-killer missile, can reach beyond the Guam base. A strike on Guam could remove significant U.S. combat power from the battle for Taiwan. Now, there's been a lot of talk about that, saying that, if China was to invade Taiwan, they might do something to Guam to disable our ability to react quickly. And there's a lot of reasons why that might be true. But the thing to keep in mind is that, of course, we're still America. So if that's their plan, I would assume we have some counter plans or at least, contingencies based on that idea. But the thing to keep in mind is that all they have is time, and they can plan as long as they want. And the minute they decide to invade Taiwan, you better understand that they have a plan for why or how they're going to deal with us and what they're going to do in order to make it as least invasive as possible. And what I mean by that is when you're talking surgical strikes, in order to create the time or the space that you need to get your job done without escalating into a full-on conflict is what I would expect to see. So keep that in mind and understand that, yes, China has to just only focus on what they're going to do to us. There's really no one else in the world that can compete with them besides possibly Russia. But I would assume technology-wise that China is probably surpassing them in many ways on many fronts. And the only reason that they don't have to really worry about each other is because, honestly, I mean, they're working together. So we can just talk about that real quick. It's not a big deal. We have time, right? We're here to just discuss things about why we should be prepared and why this is going to last for a long time. Well, it's great when two adversaries actually work together and become intertwined with their resources and their economies to the point that if we do find ourselves in a global conflict, there's a good chance they'll both be on the same team. Awesome. So, China's spending on Russian energy imports shoots up to $35 billion since the outbreak of the Ukraine war. Okay. China's spending on Russian energy imports is $35 billion. Beijing is increasingly turning to Russian oil, gas, and coal after Moscow offered some supplies at a discount. Russia is now the top supplier of coal to China after Western countries imposed sanctions and Indonesia raised prices. Okay, so listen, if we find ourselves at war with Russia, and if we find ourselves at war with China, you might as well assume or plan for the idea that we're at war with both of them. Because in all honesty, there's really no reason to think otherwise at this point in time. I mean, they're intertwined economically. They've both talked about having each other's backs. And we know that both of those countries are always going to do what's best for them, no matter what the cost or no matter what the morality issue might be. China doesn't care if everything Russia does is terrible and if everything they do is inhumane when it comes to whatever war crimes they may or may not be committed. They're still going to buy their gas and their oil because they don't care. It's the cheapest. We'll buy it because that's what's best for our economy and for the people in the country. Russia is the same exact way. Oh, China, you use, bad labor practices, which are frowned upon by the entire rest of the world. Oh, well, we'll buy your stuff. Thanks. We appreciate it. So understand that any conflict between either one of those countries is going to lead us into a conflict with possibly both of them. But even if it's not directly with both of them, economically, they'll be propped up by each other, which means that they can outlast other countries for longer during a very strenuous situation, especially when resources become tight. And I think that we've all seen how quickly the resources become tight just because of one conflict going on right now. Look what happened to world grain supplies. Look what happened to gas supplies. We all know what's going on when it comes to natural gas, and I can't wait to see what happens this winter because it's going to be terrible most likely. But I also want everyone to keep in mind that a lot of resources come from the other country too that everyone kind of needs and we might not get or have access to. And don't forget that China even cut off their supply of sand to Taiwan. Sand. That's how bad people need resources. That sand is even something that people import. Keep it in mind, all right? They use it to make silicone. It makes sense, I promise. Now, this is just a reminder just to show you how intertwined these countries are and why we shouldn't ever expect them to just not work together. They're going to work together. It's how it's going to go. All right. Dragon Slayer says the BRICS nations will do better than we will. And I have to agree in a terrible way because I don't like that idea. I don't like that concept. And I think the United States should always maintain its global standing when it comes to an economic superpower, because at the end of the day, regardless of the problems and the corruption and everything else that we have here, I still think we are the best you can get at this point in time. Would I like to see it improve? Of course. Are there things that I don't necessarily agree with or like? Of course. Would I want to live in any other country right this second? Probably not. So, honestly, I'm kind of a diehard, weird American, freak show patriot type. So I'm not going to live anywhere else. But I can understand why other people might consider their options based on the fact that things are getting weird here too. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. Now, I will say that I want to talk about things happening domestically now. We have some issues here at home we got to talk about too. And things are getting a little bit dicey as well, just being an American living at home in America. And we might not even have to worry about nuclear weapons or global conflict or foreign adversaries or anything like that, because a lot of the threats are coming at us from our own government. And a lot of our threats are coming at us from the fact that we have a dwindling food supply and an issue with drought and all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, we actually might just be an SHTF without anybody else's help. And that's kind of scary as well. But real quick, before I go into that, I do want to mention a couple of things. One is pretty funny, but I don't know if you guys saw, but Gators, who supports the channel, they're a sunglass company. They make awesome eyewear. It's made in the USA. They have ballistic lenses and all kinds of stuff. And they were featured a lot in the Terminal List, which was a really cool show. But one thing that's cool is they just released a new pair of glasses called Marauders, right? And I don't know if they stole that from me. I don't know if they just thought that was a cool name. I don't know, man. You guys tell me in the chat if you think they maybe got some inspiration from old Magic Prepper here. Because I'll be honest, I mean, we've been doing Marauder Monday for quite some time now. And now you're going to tell me that they, you know, decided that these Marauders needed to be the next model line, right? I don't know, but I am affiliated with Gators and we do work together. So I just found that interesting and I actually like them quite a bit. I mean, they are freaking sweet. So honestly, I will go ahead and I'll pop a link in there, guys, because if you use the code PREPPER15, you get 15% off any Gators eyewear. Now, yes, they're expensive, but they're made in the USA, so there's a reason why they're expensive. And I don't know, they're freaking cool. So I just wanted to mention that because you guys are amazing. Marauder Mondays is great. Every week we get together, we have a good time. And I love like the whole theme of like Marauders and stuff that kind of sticks around on this channel. But I also just found it interesting that these companies are using Marauder as a new model line. And I'm sorry, maybe I'm a little bit narcissistic or something, but let's be honest. I mean, we were doing Marauders first. That's all I'm trying to say. So there's the link for you guys. And then that's the code if you guys want it. I'm just throwing it out there. And listen, like Brian Keith Prepper, I know they're expensive. I get it. But you know what? I bought a $150 pair of sunglasses when I was 15 years old, and I still have them. You know why? Because I take care of my stuff, especially when it's expensive. So it just depends on what you want, what you're looking for. And if you want some of the best pair of glasses you can get that are ballistic rated and have, mil-spec ratings for being able to deal with the things that we deal with when we're shooting 460 Smith & Wessons, then that might be something you're interested in. All right, now moving on. Next week, I want everyone to be aware, I have a guest coming on the show who you might be interested in, and his name is Brass Facts. So if you don't know about Brass Facts, he has a cool YouTube channel, and basically there's a lot of firearm stuff. There's like optics reviews and stuff like that, but he does a really cool series on preparedness, and he goes really in depth, and I just put his channel link in the chat for everybody. But he goes really in depth with different preparedness concepts and talks about things like one of his more popular videos is, urban is not CQB. And then he goes through and discusses actual distances when you're walking in a city and stuff like that. He talks about SHTF, preparedness, civil unrest, things you would want in regards to defending yourself during those times. And he's really got an interesting level-headed approach to a lot of that information. So he'll be on next week. And we'll be discussing, all that kind of stuff. And I'll be taking Q&A from the chat. So if you guys have questions for Brass Facts, or if you don't know about him, go check out his channel. Tell him Magic sent you. And then do some research on what he puts out. And then have some cool questions to ask for him to answer next week. And that way I will go ahead and post those questions to him through the chat. And that way he can answer you guys directly. So just throwing that out there. That's going to be next week's Marauder Monday, which I think is really cool. I like some of his stuff. And I think he's got some really good concepts and ideas around what realistic expectations of SHTF might be. Okay. Now, look, I know a lot of people got pissed at me about showing off $250 sunglasses, but look, it is what it is. And, that same mentality is what hurts us when everyone talks about we need to bring manufacturing back to America, but then immediately say, oh, it's too expensive. I don't want to buy it. Okay. Well, it's just one or the other. You want cheap Chinese stuff or do you want well-made quality American stuff? You can't have both at this point in time. It's unfortunate, I know, but it's true. Okay, what else is happening in America? Because I find that there are things happening here we have to be concerned about. One of those things is the fact that 37% of American farmers say they are destroying existing crops and selling off livestock due to drought. Okay, listen, I can't verify these reports or these numbers. That's not something I have the ability to do. I can't walk down the street to every single farmer and say, hey, did you have to kill off like a third of your livestock or your crops or anything? Just checking. But what I can say is that this report is supposedly from the American Farm Bureau Federation. But at the end of the day, you should take this information as even cutting it in half being very concerning, okay? The reason these farmers are cutting their crops and everything is, according to this article, because of drought conditions, right? The drought is creating an issue or an environment where they can't afford to water their crops. They can't afford to keep their livestock going. Heat stroke is happening to the cattle and all kinds of stuff. The other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the reason why farmers aren't able to keep up with the current economy is the fact that inflation is killing them as well. They can't afford the diesel fuel. They can't afford the fertilizer. They can't afford the equipment. They can't afford anything, basically. So if they can't afford to keep things moving forward, how are they supposed to keep planting? How are they supposed to keep harvesting? How are they supposed to keep crops in the ground? They literally can't do it. And that's creating a very difficult environment, because by them not being able to afford to actually produce agriculture, you and I won't be able to afford whatever agriculture was produced, because supply and demand is a very basic concept. The less supply there is and the higher the demand is, the more expensive it becomes. And guess what? The demand for food isn't going anywhere. But if the supply goes down, it's going to get a lot more expensive. And these things are getting very difficult for these farmers to navigate, because they, deep down, although they're running a business and they're trying their best to be profitable, deep down they also know they're feeding people. Like, they are literally the reason why people have food on the table. And I'll never take anything away from farmers in that regard, because without them I wouldn't have the food I have. So it is what it is. But I can't blame them for not being able to keep up with the way things are going. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Okay, understand, the situation may only get worse as local governments implement further measures to conserve water. Okay, some of this is being done by the government as usual. Oh, we need more water. Oh, what for? Oh, the people. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to have to cut it back from the farms. Well, what happens when the farms don't make enough food for the people? Well, we'll deal with that then, because right now we got to worry about the water for the people. Okay, so you see how this works? The government takes one thing at a time and tries to do something about it. And then they create another problem by doing so. And then that problem then requires more government intervention, which will then lead to more bad decisions being made, or at least in my opinion, bad decisions. So that is exactly what we're seeing here. And understand that this is happening all over the U.S., and that this report is coming from the Midwest out to California. So according to them, we're seeing 37% on average crops being destroyed, or livestock being either sent to slaughter early or just being slaughtered. And that's exactly what should concern us in the sense of our food supply. This is not going well, okay? And yeah, the drought has something to do with it. The drought conditions are definitely tough, okay? But at the end of the day, some of this is government induced. Just like, I don't know, what happened in 2020 when the economy was completely shut down thanks to the government. All right, so what else is going on here? Well, there's some things we got to consider and talk about, of course. McBean, Scottish Fitness, good to see you. Good to see you. We've got Mark Olson here. Savage Lee in the woods is here as well. Lily Bishop, good to see you. Alaska Preppers here. All right, good to see you, Rudy. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. And if you guys don't know Alaska Prepper, awesome guy, especially if you want advice on like canning or pressure canning or anything like that when it comes to storing food for the long term. Make sure you check out Alaska Prepper's channel, because he's got some great advice when it comes to that stuff. And he's also just a very calm and humble guy that's fun to listen to, because he's got that kind of voice that can soothe you and kind of take you off the edge of the cliff. And I'm just saying that because he's here, I promise. No, I'm honest. Like, he really is a very, very calm and just a nice guy. He's very nice to listen to and nice to interact with. So let's stop having the fluff session now and move on to the next part of the conversation, which is a little bit less fluffy, unfortunately. All right. I think the title of this article should tell you everything you need to know. Now, this is an op-ed, okay? So this is all opinion-based. And of course, this is a lot related to the recent raid and all kinds of stuff that's happening around the country. But the thing we have to keep in mind is that ideological Americans are being targeted as possible threats. The problem is that there's only one type of ideology that's being targeted, and it has nothing to do with the groups who were involved with actual destruction of property and violence for an entire year during 2020. However, that doesn't matter to the Department of Justice. So this is a very difficult situation we find ourselves in. And it kind of paints a picture as to what to expect in the future here. And what's unfortunate about this, and this is something I'm trying to come to terms with myself, but it's something I want you all to keep in mind, okay? Look, I have my own thoughts and my own feelings when it comes to the left-right situation here in the country. I have my own thoughts and feelings on Republicans and Democrats, and I would prefer to have my own associations rather than being told I have to affiliate with one or the other. That being said, that doesn't matter to these people. I can say, oh, I'm independent, or oh, I am a Green Party, or whatever it is, because of the things I participate in. I'm a prepper. I like firearms. I'm a Pro 2A enthusiast. All those things immediately put me in the category of ideological threat, regardless of my politics, regardless of my party affiliation, regardless of how I vote, or any of those things that people think that line is drawn with. Okay. I could literally go vote Democrat tomorrow, and they'll still put me in the right-wing extremist ideology just because I have a Gadsden flag in the background of my videos. So keep this in mind, because it doesn't matter who you affiliate with. It doesn't matter how you vote. If you have any of these markings they've put out there as being potential problems, well, guess what? You're on that list now too. And it doesn't matter to them at all what else you do or what else you're involved with. If you do any of these activities or support any of these groups or have any of these affiliations, you're a problem, and you're probably going to deal with being a problem at some point in time. So these are things to keep in mind. And I can't go too far into this whole conversation just because it gets weird and it's hard to navigate without hitting the tripwire from time to time. But I wanted to remind everybody that this is an issue we have to really think about and consider. I don't want to ever see us as preppers or as Americans in some kind of domestic conflict. That's a terrible, terrible scenario that nobody should hope for or wish for. But what I will say is that the possibility of it exists, even if we don't wish for it. So I'm going to be prepared for some kind of scenario like that, regardless of whether or not I want it to happen, because I don't want any of this to be happening. I don't want to be on a list. I don't want to be considered a possible threat when I really do love America and I try my best to be a true patriot. But at the same time, that doesn't matter to them. So I have to prepare as if my thoughts don't matter, because according to them, they don't. Keep that in mind when you're thinking about possibilities in the future of what you should be prepared for. Regardless of what it is, your feelings on something don't necessarily dictate how things actually happen. And I think that's a bad thought process a lot of us get caught up in, right? Like, oh, well, this is the right thing, so we're good to go here. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that we're not going to experience a terrible emergency during it just because what's happening is correct, right? So always keep that in mind. Things can happen regardless of feelings or emotions. Now, and welcome to my life says, patriotism is a crime in their eyes as well. And like, that's the problem. That's the consideration. Being too patriotic now is actually an issue and could create a reasonable threat based on the fact that you love this country too much, right? So see how that goes. See how that starts to look. It's a problem. And of course, there have been issues with both sides of that coin throughout time. So there's a lot of weird grudges maybe, or I don't know, old wounds that are being reopened now. And you and I might not have participated in any of that, yet here we are being thrown into it regardless. Okay. So let's see. I will go ahead and jump to the next thing, because when we're talking about the possibility of a tyrannical scenario, we have to talk about what's about to happen here. Okay. So August 24th, if you didn't know, which is in 2 days, the rules all change on 80% lowers. Okay. So understand that the ATF, which is not a legislative body and cannot actually write law. So, right. But yeah, according to them, they wrote some new rules basically saying that as of the 24th, even lowers that aren't technically complete, if they're complete enough to be completed in a way that's easier than it is hard, then they still count, right? So that changes precedent. That changes history of what we were allowed to do as Americans for many, many, many years. And you tell me how you feel about it if you want. But what I'm trying to tell you is that August 24th, it might be very difficult to acquire something that's only 80% complete at that time. So that is all something to keep in mind. Now, why are they doing this? You know why. Because they can. And if it's one more thing they can do to regulate and to keep out of the hands of Americans, well, they're going to do it regardless of the legal precedent. And even if this fails in the Supreme Court, or even if it fails in a district court, or whatever it is, just keep in mind that during that time, this will be the current understanding of the law or the rules, and then people will not be able to access these things. So that's the issue we always run into. People will say, well, don't worry, the Supreme Court will shoot it down. Okay, well, if the Supreme Court doesn't get to the case for a year or two, that's a year or two of people not being able to access things that they should legally have access to. So that's still problematic, even if it gets resolved eventually. So always remember that which is another piece of the puzzle regarding SHTF taking a long time. It can go right to this type of process as well. Could you imagine if there was some kind of legislation on the table that could actually help Americans, that could actually fix some of our economic issues, that could actually help us get rid of inflation? Not this Inflation Act that just happened. Don't get me wrong, that thing is crap. I'm talking about real legislation that could help people. Well, that might not happen for a long time. And even if it did happen, it has to go through its process. And then there will be legal challenges to it because somebody won't like it. And then those legal challenges will have to go to court. And you see how long everything will take to actually resolve. Even if that would help us, it could take years for it to finally be fully implemented. So keep all of that in mind. And just to get everybody on the same page here to go over the actual rules that are happening regarding that exact type of product, okay, is what we'll call it here. Summary of Final Rule 2021 R05F, okay? Definition of frame or receiver and identification of firearms, okay? Let's go ahead and write down here. Definition of a firearm or receiver includes a partially complete, disassembled, or non-functional frame or receiver that has reached a stage in manufacture where it may be quickly and readily be made to function as a frame or receiver, and expressly excludes a block of metal, liquid polymers, and or other raw materials, or a frame or receiver that has been destroyed. So you understand that they're trying to say, like, well, if it's a solid block of metal or if it's liquid plastic or things that we literally can't regulate because they are not even existing in a certain form at this point, well, those can't count. But everything else that could be easily made into a frame or receiver is now not allowed, okay? This is why everyone should be keeping an eye out to what's going on here. This is for them to keep an eye on what you're doing, okay? 80% was a way to get people involved with creating something for themselves, which was legal and is still legal. And that was something that gave Americans the power to have access to items that they didn't have to go through a process to acquire, all right? Now, you can see why a federal agency would not like that idea. You can see why they would try to prevent this from being able to be legal anymore. But this is likely not to hold up because of the fact that throughout history, we've been allowed to do these things, and it's part of our rights as Americans. Will people argue that? Sure. Everyone's going to argue that. They don't like it, right? They're going to try their best to get rid of the fact that people have access to things that someone else doesn't think they should. But at the end of the day, inalienable rights, sorry, I couldn't say that correctly, are just that. So you tell me. But at the end of this conversation, I want you to walk away knowing that on August 24th, which is in 2 days, you won't be able to just get those things the way you can right now. It's the best I can say that without getting myself in trouble here, okay? So hopefully everybody has all that information figured out. Do you see why this whole thing is going to last a long time, though? Do you see what's going on? I mean, every day there's some new information. There's some new situation that could literally result in global conflict. And all it takes is one miscalculation, one mistake, or one bad decision for us to finally be there. And we get opportunities for that to occur every single day. But we're not there quite yet. The only thing we can do is keep preparing. Because the worst case scenario that's most likely right now is that this thing just keeps dragging on and inflation keeps going up and the economy keeps going down into the toilet to the point where we can't even afford to live anymore. And that's going to be really, really tough because you know what? At that point in time, we're not going to have anything left to survive SHTF with. And that actually is really starting to concern me. You know, if you have a year's worth of food and you lose your job, you lose your income, and possibly even your home, who knows? You lose everything, but you still have that food. What happens after that year? I mean, that's just what we're looking at, what we have to consider at this point. We're in SHTF already in many ways. This isn't like waiting for SHTF. This is waiting for full blown. This is waiting for without rule of law. This is waiting for that apocalyptic scenario that we all see in the movies that we never assumed could occur. But at some point, it could occur, actually. And if you ask people over in Ukraine right now whether or not their lives are apocalyptic in some ways, they will tell you, yes, indeed they are. And so understand that this can happen in modern society. This can happen in modernized countries. And this can happen even if it's just because of a long war of attrition with our own economic factors. And that's unfortunately where things could easily be going right now. So I think I wanted to have this conversation because it's just a feeling I'm having lately. I'm concerned about the length of time this is all going on for. I'm concerned about riding the wave for long enough to where I don't fall off and drown. And I'm concerned that by the end of it all, we'll all be wondering what happened to all of our stuff. If we have to sell things in order to keep moving forward, eventually you run out of things to sell. If you every time you go to the grocery store, you have to leave one item off the cart because you can't afford that anymore. At what point are you running out of items to leave on the shelf? I mean, that's just exactly what this could be. And I don't like that any more than anyone else. But unfortunately, I don't really have a say in it. All I can do is keep preparing. So let's see. Big Daddy, good to see you. Gucci Mane, good to see you as well. Patriot Zero, thank you for being here. I'm trying to say hi to some people just because I like all of you. I really do. Social Dilemma, hello. Who's going to be left with money to buy your stuff? Well, don't you know? Probably the government. Haven't you seen the gun buybacks happening? Oh, yeah. Those are going to be a lot more popular the more desperate people get. Won't that be interesting? It won't be a forced confiscation if everybody just needs food instead of firearms. So, and although there are millions and millions of gun owners in the United States, how many of those millions would hang on to their last gun rather than putting food in the mouths of their children? I don't know. But if you control the food, you control the population. And it's really interesting that you could see that scenario playing out, couldn't you? Now that I said it, doesn't it make you think? All right. So, Crazy Joe, I mentioned you to boost your street cred. So hopefully it helps. And when you're out on the streets, make sure you drop my name and let everyone know, like, what's up, okay? I guess I haven't been on the streets for a very long time. So now that I have deducted my own street cred in order to help your street cred, let's call it a night. You guys, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you every single Monday. I mean, it's amazing. And like I said, Brass Facts will be here next Monday. I want to go ahead and put him in the chat here for you once again. Check out his channel. Honestly, if you guys haven't watched it, if you're into firearms, he's got some really good stuff with that. But even if you're not into firearms, if you just want to think about some preparedness and do some game theory, he's got some really good videos on preparedness for civil unrest, for SHTF. And he talks about how the stages of unrest or SHTF will look like. And he goes through like multiple stages, like the initial stages, and then it's like advanced, and then it's like beyond repair, all kinds of stuff that kind of really makes you think about how you're constructing your strategy based on what kind of scenarios you anticipate. So I really appreciate his thought process on it, and I think that'll be a really good conversation. So make sure you guys come here next week and check that out. And then in the meantime, if you do go over to his channel, tell him I sent you, because it'll probably just be annoying and I'll find that interesting. All right. All right. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Crazy Joe, thanks for promoting the channel. Annie's here. Thank you so much for being here. And if you guys need anything else from me, you know where to go. Make sure you check out the Discord. We have a good time over there. I'm MIA from time to time. Exile Reviews can tell you that. But you know what? It's just because I like all of you guys conversating as well and building those networks and communities that we're trying to put together. So make sure you check the Discord out. Now in the chat as well. That should give you some resources as well as the ability to maybe meet people in your area to establish a mag. And let's do this again next week. I'll see you then.